Hello and welcome back to my 5-year project where I'm going through life so far 5 years at a time. I guess going by my age, that'll be about 10 videos. I guess we'll see. We'll see. I have a feeling some of these early ones will be pretty chunky. Maybe there'll be some decades in there I can just cram into one 5-minute video because how much happens. Or how much I want to talk about. Um, So yeah, we're at year 15. Uh, so we're gonna go, as with the other videos, I think it's kind of the halo around 15 as much as being 15. Precisely, it's the awkward years. I had a very, very surprise as an awkward adult. I had a very awkward adolescence. Um, Puberty hit with a vengeance. Um, I was a very shy, introverted little dude um, with some very firm ideas about oh God, just like for some reason I don't know like what was happening with my family, but no one just like took me aside and say, "Hey, John, use antiperspirant or deodorant of some sort," you know, um, or just stuff like uh, well, actually, that's probably a really big one. I smelled. I was a teenager and I smelled. Um, I spent most of my time, yeah, with myself, reading, probably jacking off, you know, all that sexual energy. Um, um, Doing a lot of reading, uh, a lot of late nights reading science fiction and fantasy. First comic books and then science fiction and fantasy. Um, Up until maybe around 15, I was big into. I was a part of a swim club, and like every day I would take the bus. Not yeah, nearly every day I guess. Can't remember what it was. I would take the bus across town to the swimming pool, picking up comic books. Uh, when I did the transfer downtown, that was someone's doing some hosing. And get all the comic books of that day. So I guess I had enough kind of stuff from like an allowance. I was never had to, I'm affluent in a family that never had to have like a part-time little job while I was miserably failing at school because I was probably too busy reading comic books and science fiction and fantasy and into all that to actually really do my homework. Um, there's a lot of, I guess, after my father kind of really tried to grind me down and sort of bully me in a kind of a probably English UK style kind of boarding school kind of way into being a better student. They sort of gave up on me. Felt like I got passed over for my younger brother. At least that's how it felt to me. Um, you know, I think I got sat down by my mother at some point and said like, "You're not smart like I am, John," which is like was one of those asides that just really always stuck with me about my mother's self worth getting passed on to me. Um, um, yeah, and I mean I think at the same time I have probably a feeling that my father's drinking was probably ramping up. Um, you know, I have a feeling that was coming. That was coming. I might do just a little separate video on that. My father's drinking and the results of that. Um, what else in this time? Um, so yeah, I was a very introverted, bookish guy, super bullied. The transfer to high school did not go well. I got would get chased around by bullies. Uh, at recess and lunch, ended up taking shelter in the library for a lot of that time. That was probably my most positive positive relationship in that school was with the school librarian. She saw probably more of me than anyone else did. Um, yeah, yeah. I had close friendships with like one or two geeks, fellow outcasts, fellow bullied people. Um, it was not a happy time. Probably get in here. Um, Kind of the transition into high school and stuff like that was probably the closest I was to like um, suicidal. Just kind of the constant pressures, both at home and at school, were really brutal, really brutal. Um, uh, and so yeah, I probably spent a lot of the time like at late at night, inhaling science fiction and fantasy books, listening to old radio that would get rebroadcast on a station somewhere in Kelowna. Uh, a lot of times walking, being outdoors, like in the summer times, it was still very much being outdoors, but more kind of walking around on my own in the kind of like we lived on the outskirt of town, so I could just turn, go through a couple of developments that were going to be more and more developments, and more developments, and just kind of ate up the mountain. But at that point, what weren't, I could just walk up into the woods and just lose myself. And the odd time, just get completely lost, but just, okay, go down towards the water. And once you've gone down towards the water, you'll find civilization again. Yeah, yeah. I mean, on the positive side, yeah, I think I inhaled a lot of 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 books at that point. The bookish me um, probably crystallized there as much as anywhere else of a way of dealing with the world. Um, you know, we're at the same, and I think like for my last years of high school, English class weren't weren't much of a thing because I got put in remedial English because I never got particularly the hang of grammar in high school itself. That came later. So my essay, and I didn't really know. I wasn't never really got the hang of essays in high school. I was a pretty shit student all around. I guess I can semi forgive people for thinking I was incredibly unremarkable as a kid in high school. I mean, a better part of that was it's like I was being bullied mercilessly in school. I hated it. Didn't want to be there. When I was away, I certainly didn't want to do any homework. So I was always reading, but I was reading, probably genre genre junk for the most part. Virtually exclusively science fiction and fantasy. Anything of me going branching into literature and stuff like that didn't happen until the very end of high school and into what became college and university for me. But I'll talk about that later. Um, yeah, what else do I want to say about this time? Well, other than I had massive crushes on multiple uh, girls, you know, that I longed for in a non-romantic sense. Um, you know, that was I was definitely the horny, straight dude. This is the point where I would have probably I discovered my father's pornography collection in our basement. Because I'm a kid poking around, I did find a a trunk, a huge trunk that was just filled with porno magazines. A lot of it, obviously, from his youthful times, British, uh, British American pornography, and I would secrete out things of that and use them as teenage boys are wont to do. Use them a lot. So that was my definitely I did have the internet. I had my father's extensive porn collection, which so there was that. I also, because my father had his office where he had a lock safe, and it's like, I'm a kid, so it's like, okay, how can I get into the lock safe? Get into the lock safe, and yeah, there's his guns there because my father collected guns, went to the shooting range and would shoot targets and stuff like that. That's going to come back later. And I wasn't interested in those at all. But he also had, uh, um, you know, um, video video porn because my family had gotten a VCR. I think we started off with a Betamax, and then went on to a VCR, and yeah, with that came came that as well. Came the pornography, which I would, when my family was away at all, I would break into it. I think I kind of took off the hinges to get at it. It's like, the teenage boner is will find a way, um, and I get into it and watch these videos. So even though it's pre-internet, I found a healthy supply of both picture and video porn. Um, you know, my father, who also kind of passed on to me a love of history and of reading in general. That's the other thing. But it's like, I think probably we had a sex talk, which was just a really kind of awkward, like, you got any questions about this kind of talk? Just, I was melting, and obviously he was just incredibly uncomfortable. And I think I was given a book on it, and it was just like, yeah, okay. And it's like, I looked at that book a lot less than I ever would have looked. I looked at the, the terrible the terrible 70s and 80s porn with all its sure unhealthy but deeply alluring images, um, all that sort of stuff. Good lord, yeah, yeah. Um, so those are some snapshots of me at 15. Lonely, horny, smelly, uh, um, reading, late into the night, listening to old radio, which would be stuff like The Shadow and kind of old, kind of pulp adventure stuff. While I was reading, like, Conan books that were probably kind of the Elsbreg de Camp kind of pastiches, and Robert Jordan kind of like reimaginings of Conan, as well as sprinkled in with some actual Robert E. Howard old pulp stuff. Also, Jack Benny, and Fibber McGee and Molly, and all that sort of stuff. So kind of an odd kind of mix of that stuff, while at the same time, you'd come home from school and it would be Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch and Three's Company. So this odd mix of a lot of the culture, the limited culture that you got, was just all the stuff from earlier ages, both in that, I mean, maybe my books like were Piers Anthony, uh, also very terribly sexist punny stuff, but at least it was a terribly sexist punny stuff of the time, the 80s. uh, yeah, a lot of Piers Anthony, but also very light and humorous, and took me away from stuff. um, a lot of old science fiction. I would go to the secondhand. We had a secondhand bookstore, which I think it had comics, but it also had science fiction, and that's where I kind of my transfer. It's like, I was spending so much money on comic books, but I wasn't getting much to read out of them. Whereas if I bought a novel for $1.50 versus a comic, it would last me a lot longer. And my teen brain did the math there and went with, let's go with books instead. Even though I love comics, and I still do love them now, even though I'm not into the superhero comics I was at the time, all those power fantasies and and amazing physique bodies. Remember Spider-Man getting dressed or undressed in his in a tight space, and part of me kind of being like, oh, he's drawn really nicely. He's drawn really nicely. So there was even a little bit of that there. I'm probably, you know, 80, 70, 60% heterosexual, but definitely another part of me definitely, you know, into the male form. That comes later because at the time it's deeply homophobic time, and I was completely awash in all of that. I remember hating the Pet Shop Boys. A lot of stuff that I realize now that, oh, I hated this because the general culture deemed this as gay or queer or something like that, and so I just kind of took that in and just like, oh well, I hate it too. It must be terrible. Yeah, music wise, it's like, listening to. There was the '80s. There was Samantha Fox and Video Hits, which is This is the Canadian Samantha Fox, and just inhaling all of that. Uh, but mostly being into, like, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones. A lot of the kind of the '60s music was what I kind of I took comfort from. And at the same time, there was like radio stations that were playing, like, the '50s stuff, you know, Good Rockin' Tonight, and it was all that. So it was very much the '80s nostalgia for the '50s, which I was sort of into at the time. I mean, this is also the time. Well, actually, Star Wars was like, I watched the first Star Wars in a drive-in theater back in, like, when I was like 7 or 8 or 12 or something like that, somewhere in there. So should have been in the past video, but it was Indiana Jones. It was like the '80s, and it's like Indiana Jones movies and all that sort of, kind of adventure, more pulp stuff. And it was like, it was boomer people looking back at their kind of pulp fiction kind of roots, which I knew because I'd been inhaling pulp fiction as a kid in the '80s too. So it really it spoke to me. I mean, it spoke to lots of people because it was fun adventure stuff that was packaged extremely well. Yeah, and I did have one friend who was a girl. Um, but when she went off to high school, our friendship ended because boys and girls weren't allowed to be friends. And we couldn't really acknowledge that, or else we'd get teased horribly for it. That sort of happens between 10 and 15. And I was always sad about that. And we were, at that weird age where we would play out weird S&M, totally G-rated fantasies together. Um, but also we're just friends, and it was interesting. Like, she basically walked up our driveway one day and said, "Hi, I'm new to the neighborhood. Do you have any girls around my age?" And it's like, "No." It's like, "Oh, well, okay, there's you." So I got to be her friend, uh, which was really nice for a while. And then she went to high school, and then she got a boyfriend, and yeah, that was sort of the last I ever had in contact with her. But I was such an awkward, smelly, unappealing person to be around at that point. So inward, so self-absorbed. That yeah, yeah. But I do remember that's like my one kind of like, oh, I had female friendship at that point before kind of the wall slammed down of adolescence, and that got stopped for a long time. A long time. I'm I'm better at having female relationships now, as much as I'm better as good at having relationships with people in general. But yeah, yeah, that's always kind of a little tinge of sadness there that never continued. But then again, um, all these people I'm talking about, none of them make the jump. None of them make the leap. As we go from 15 to 20, uh, yeah, none of them make the leap. I jump into a different world, and they are all that Kelowna stuff is going to be left behind. Um, I think I will do an intermediate video in here, which will cover maybe not only what happens with my father, but my leaving my leaving Kelowna. So it'll be year, you know, it'll be 15, 17, so somewhere like 17, like, you know, in that half range in there. I will do a video about leaving Kelowna, leaving my family, leaving my friends, and cutting myself off from all of that, and why I did it. So yeah, I'll put that in my next video. All right, talk to you later.